WNST. There's no such thing as the old 2-hour and 14-minute World Series game, is there, Luke Jones?
Certainly not. I mean, if you can get a 3:15, that's not too bad. But yeah, you're not going to have those 2-hour, 20-minute games, those 2-hour, 30-minute games in the World Series. I mean, the stakes are just too high. The reliance on bullpens just far too great, and it really is a different game than it was even 10 years ago. I mean, look at the bullpen usage now compared to 5 to 10 years ago. I mean, we saw the Orioles and the Royals be some of these early teams that really went heavy with their bullpens, and it's just grown from there. It's not going back. When you're seeing even Chris Sale and Clayton Kershaw only go 4 or 5 innings in a World Series game, and let's be clear, neither of them were at the top of their game in Game 1, but it definitely speaks to a far different animal that we're talking about, Major League Baseball, especially in the postseason.
Luke, I can't help but get sidetracked onto the Orioles, but I just want to stay on the World Series for a couple of minutes, and then we'll get to Victor Mason, wherever the Orioles are, and sort of the deafening silence of that part of this. But from the baseball perspective, the TV ratings are down. I find myself watching these games with, I don't know, very little rooting interest, right? Like, I don't have any love or hatred for most of this, including Machado. I'll feel good for the Dodgers fans if they win. I'm going to feel better that this weekend there's going to be better weather. The one thing that I hated about going to World Series games back in the 90s when I was on the traveling circuit, and I probably have been to, 40 or 50 World Series games personally in my life, and most of them I remember being very, very cold. And that's sitting in a press box with free hot chocolate and free coffee. It's just a really not fun experience. And I had an opportunity to go on Wednesday night to Game 2. And, my wife's sort of a closet Red Sox fan at this point. And, where I am with baseball and my annoyance with most of this with the Orioles and disgust with that. There is that point where, do you want to go get on a plane and sit in a stadium when it's 41 degrees, when even when you're sitting at home, you're not all that captivated by it? And I passed. I had a chance to go on Wednesday night. Weather, don't want to get sick, got to go to Charlotte this weekend, things going on, real life in the way. And I don't feel like I'm missing anything, which is really... maybe it's part of being 50. Maybe it's part of where baseball is at this point. I am looking forward to going down to Charlotte this weekend. I'm looking forward to doing the Ravens game. So I'm not sour on sports or even sour on baseball if Major League Baseball announces a November 10th press conference and the Angelos family's ceding control and they're going to find a buyer. If that's where we are, I'm ready to come back and love baseball. But boy, there's not a whole lot that's compelling about this for me right now, and these are two pretty good teams.
Yeah, I'll say this, though. I think the last couple of years were very, very, very compelling. I thought Astros-Dodgers last year was a great World Series, even if Game 7 maybe ended up being a little underwhelming compared to the lead-up to that. I thought the Cubs and the Indians the year before that were great. So I think this matchup lacks the same pizzazz because we've seen the Red Sox win the World Series 3 times in the last 15 years. I mean, that used to be... I still think back to that 2004 postseason. I mean, that was such a novel concept for everyone. I mean, short of someone in their 90s, you had never seen the Red Sox win the World Series. So they've won it 3 times. They won 108 games, so it's not as though they were an underdog this year or anything like that. And then the Dodgers, yeah, they have a 30-year drought, but they're also coming off of an appearance in the World Series last year. So I think that's hurt it, even though at face value you'd say, well, you have these 2 big market teams, high payroll teams, but I think there is something to be said about having some kind of an underdog or something new at play. I think the time of game certainly isn't helping, although I don't know what the perfect solution is. We reek of East Coast bias when we complain about the start times because, okay, you can start the game at 7 o'clock. Is it fair that the game starts at 4 o'clock on the West Coast then? I mean, is that fair to people that are still at work for another hour and a half, 2 hours? So I don't know what the perfect solution is there, but we've talked about this piece a lot, and I think unless you have a really really interesting matchup. And like I said, I think there's reasons why this isn't quite as interesting as just looking at it from two big markets from a TV rating standpoint. Baseball's a regional game. It really is, and it's become that way even more so. I think it bears out in what their nationally televised rate numbers typically are compared to what the numbers are in each market.
Dude, it really is crazy. Unless you love or hate the Red Sox or love or hate the Dodgers, at least you can find the game because it's not on 8:58 on my, you know what I mean? Like, you put it on, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm a little numb to it, and I don't know that anyone who's a Atlanta Braves fan is like sitting on the edge of their seat hating on the Dodgers. I don't know. It's weird, man. I haven't experienced this sort of vibe before for it. And part of it is that when I don't recognize the game so much, when I tell you the analytics people are great, man, because the ball gets hit right at everyone all the time, kind of sort of, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that because I think part of it, and this is something that I've talked about a little bit from time to time, and I'm just going to use John Smoltz as an example. He is by no means exclusive to this argument, and I want to be very clear. John Smoltz has forgotten 100 times more about baseball than I will ever know in my humble following and fandom, and now doing this for my livelihood. But I think there's such a disconnect with how the game is presented compared to what the game has become. And what I mean by that, and you mentioned the analytics, how many times do we just hear baseball announcers crushing on analytics and this isn't sustainable and this isn't the way we did things when I played, and you just hear that and it's not calibrated with what the game has become. I mean, let's be very clear about this. Say what you want about infield shifting and bullpenning and openers and analytics and different statistics that a, quote, traditional baseball fan might not understand. No one in baseball is doing those things to harm the game deliberately. Why are they using those things? To win. It gives you a better chance to win. That's what it's about. But you always feel this pushback in virtually any telecast, and there are some exceptions out there. And maybe I'm speaking from a minority standpoint now, but I'd love to see baseball and some of these networks deliberately seek some individuals who are more cutting edge with what's going on with the game. And instead of just pushing back and saying, well, we didn't do it this way and this isn't going to work and this is why you can't do it this way, I'd like to hear more explanation and more embracing doing things this way and to actually use it as a teachable moment for fans. I think broadcasts are really lagging behind for what we're actually starting to see with these games. And I think that, and I don't think that's the sole reason that you're expressing what you were expressing or the ratings are what they are, but I absolutely think that's part of the issue. I think baseball kind of fights itself on this whole thing. And believe me, I'll hear arguments as far as ways to improve, maybe not even the pace of play as much for me as much as to create more action, have more balls put in play. And the biggest obstacle continues to be the velocity. That is the biggest problem in terms of balls being put in play and talking about the number of strikeouts and all of that. But I do think baseball, and Rob Manfred is guilty of this, baseball's really, there's really a self-loathing element to this that I think hasn't been healthy for the game. How often do you hear Rob Manfred just complain about the pace of play? And you get to a point sometimes where you wonder if he even likes baseball. Well,
I'm starting to not like baseball. I guess that's my point, right? I'll admit that out loud. I mean, who else is out there that feels the way I do? I'm not the only one. Dude, I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I woke up at 4 in the morning on Wednesday after Game 1. And I watched most of Game 1, but I was like doing dishes during the early innings, and and then it's the third inning, and it's 9 o'clock or 9:30, and you're like, "Wow, I still got plenty of baseball." Then it's the seventh inning, and it's 10:30, and you're like, "Wow, I still got plenty of baseball." And the games haven't been like close or nail-bitey for me. Game 2 more so, and it got played at a better pace or whatever. But I woke up at 6 in the morning, and the number one baseball writer in the country for me is Jeff Passan at this point, who is critical, and which is one of the reasons he is good, because Ken Rosenthal's a little bit too in bed with the Shield. And for me, I mean, he can't be as critical as maybe he once was here. And I feel that way about every Jason Stark and every sort of bought-off sort of guy that can't be too critical of Major League Baseball. Passan sort of is pretty critical of Major League Baseball, and at 6 o'clock in the morning after Game 1, his whole column was about how the sport stinks, and that I don't know how anybody outside the circle can get excited or rally around this when it wasn't just Game 1. It's not just a trend. This is the game now. This is how we play chess in the modern era, and it doesn't look at all like Raleigh Fingers in 1974 anymore.
Yeah, but the NFL doesn't look like it did in 1978, and this kind of goes back.
And there's plenty of people complaining about that too, right?
I think you have too many people, and not so much a writer. I mean, but broadcasters that are paid to broadcast games. There are too many people just beating on the game all the time too. I think. Well,
it's got to get better, dude. I mean, if I've been doing this 27 years, I built a company around baseball,
okay,
even though the owner's a creep. I love baseball, but I'm telling you right now, this isn't very good. This isn't entertaining.
Okay, the NFL postseason last year was horrible until the Super Bowl. I mean, it happens. You and I last year, I remember talking about how good the MLB postseason was. Sometimes there's going to be some duds. I totally agree with that.
Man, when Red Sox Dodgers in Fenway Park and Dodger Stadium and cold weather in Boston and warm weather in L.A. and a bad guy in Machado and I don't know. Do the Red Sox have any good guys? I don't think so. There are plenty of stars. There's plenty of good players. There's J.D. Martinez. There's, the Dodgers haven't won since Kirk Gibson. Vince Scully's still alive. I mean, there's a million things, big stories in the big cities. They want the big markets. They got the big markets. They can't get larger fan bases than they have. And I don't know, man. I don't know what to say. I mean, I'm going to Charlotte, and I hope to be watching on Saturday night in Game 4, right?
Right. But I'm again. Did you not acknowledge last postseason was good? I mean, am I the only one who remembers that it was really compelling?
I think there have
really
been plenty of I mean, I think the Cubs were a great story. I think the Royals and the Giants.
What's changed from last year to this year is my question. I mean, I'm asking you. You're the one saying how terrible it's been.
Well, this is the first year that I've really noticed that everybody's striking out, everybody's hitting a home run, the ball's never in play, everything is managed by a computer, and the ball generally gets hit right at people. And I don't know, man. I mean, it's part of technology and how it's either making our lot this thing. I mean, I'm holding my phone up. Luke, has it made my life better or worse? I don't know. Depends which day you ask me and who's tweeting me and when and what's making me laugh and what's making me cry. I don't know. But baseball has now been managed into this place where I don't know that it's even interesting to people like me who allegedly love baseball and have written books about baseball and have dedicated large, long stretches of my life and my last name to baseball. And I don't know that baseball's loving me back right now. And in my community, for my fandom, for my investment in everything that I've invested in baseball with my time, my love, I don't know. I should be digging the Red Sox Dodgers right now, and I'm not the only one. No one else is digging it on my Facebook or Twitter. Maybe some other people got excited about it. I could get more excited about it, but doesn't feel like anybody's excited about it. Doesn't even look like the people in Boston are all that excited about it because it's 41 degrees.
Well, I don't know what you want to do about short of moving the World Series to a neutral location, which I think would be a colossal mistake.
L.A. is a neutral location.
I don't know what you want to do about that. So, I mean, some of it's picking nits. I mean, it really is. But some of it, there's some issues. But I'll continue to, how do you fix it? Right now, if you're saying how terrible it is, which I don't agree. I think there are some issues, but I still think it's a really good game that needs some tweaking.
Well, I think they're going to go to a pitch clock at some point, right? I mean, that's going to be the next thing.
And I don't think
because Manfred is dead set. Manfred knows I'm talking ugly about the game, and he hears other people talking ugly about the game, and he knows Jeff Passan's talking ugly about the game, and the Nielsen overnights are talking ugly about the game.
Talking ugly about the game. Again, baseball's become such a self-loathing environment. I think it feeds into some of the legitimate issues. You know,
well, the issue we have here is every time someone runs in front of the left field scoreboard at Fenway Park, it says 115 losses.
Well, okay, you're changing the subject.
Well,
now.
if it's a regional, well, then we should change the subject, right, to the Orioles and where they are. Because if it is a regional interest, and if you and I are going to get lubed up about loving the Orioles again, or anybody in our audience, it's gonna start with the Orioles getting better for us to love baseball more, no matter what, right? Like no matter who's playing in the World Series the next couple of years, it ain't going to be us.
Sure. And let me. I want to go back to something I said. I meant the NFL postseason 2 years ago, which was awful. Go back and look at that. Games were blowouts, not competitive. There were some injuries that impacted some matchups, but
having a whole league of broken quarterbacks, where the Ravens are playing the Deshaun Kaiser, that wasn't any good last year. I mean, that's the one thing.
For the Ravens specifically, like their schedule of games. I mean, it was good for them from a wins standpoint, but
a lot of people in Carolina this week have attributed quarterbacks being upright to Cam Newton going to Roger Goodell 3 years ago and saying this isn't any fun for me to be playing. It's no fun for the league. It's no fun for anybody when I can't walk in Week 8. So part of this, it's made maybe the games on Sunday aren't as good, but it's made the game overall better because Aaron Rodgers and Joe Flacco and Ben Roethlisberger, they're all playing football right now, and it's Halloween. And that there's nothing that makes the NFL more gross than when the quarterbacks don't play, for me.
Right. But getting back to baseball, and we'll get to the Orioles here in a moment, but I'll go back to something I said. Some of the pitch clock and limiting shifts and things like that, fine, knock yourself out. I think you can do that. I still think the most inherent problem at this point in time is the velocity. Pitchers are throwing harder than they ever did, and people can keep talking about how the game was played 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Well, you know what? The average velocity, say 30 or 40 years ago, was probably about 87 or 88 miles per hour.
Yeah, Scott McGregor was pitching in the World Series. He couldn't break a pane of glass.
Everyone is throwing, short of Clayton Kershaw, who used to throw hard, but you have relievers who, at a minimum, are throwing 94 or 95 miles per hour. I mean, that used to be a big deal when someone threw 94. Now, if you don't throw that hard, you have a tough time being in the major leagues for the long haul. But I think the velocity continues to be the biggest problem. So we can try to tweak other things as much as we want, but I don't know how you fix that. I mean, what, are you just going to tell pitchers you're not allowed to throw hard? No. So
everything about the game's gotten better, which has made it worse, which is really the fascinating, I always say that with the Angelo story. The thing in life he never wanted to have happen was the Washington Nationals. That was the thing that would have wrecked all of this for him. And it's the thing that, he's going to die, but it's the thing that's left his family with $2 billion instead of $318 million and selling the baby off to baseball 15 years ago. It's the difference maker, and it's the worst thing in the world. And for baseball, they wanted the pitchers to get better. They wanted the chicks to dig the long ball. They wanted, to position players better and be smarter and smarter and smarter about it. And they've done all that, but it hasn't made it more interesting.
Well, that's a subjective, that's an opinion. I think there are issues with the game, sure, but I still find it to be very compelling. But I also will admit, me personally, I've changed a lot as a baseball fan, and a consumer of baseball, and maybe that has to do that I've become a little more sabermetrically inclined. I'll say this, and we've talked about this a lot.
And it makes the game more interesting to you. It makes it more complicated for me, and it's already complicated for me because it's not interesting. It's paint drying.
That's your opinion. You keep saying that like that's fact. That's not fact. That's your opinion. I don't think it's like paint
I don't
drying.
think it's made more interesting to more people. Okay? I'll just say that.
Okay.
I don't think more people are more interested, and I think there are a lot of people like me that still view the game in a certain way and want to view the game in this way and want to give more time to the game. But then I look up and see 115 losses, and I see my audience wants to talk about football. My head says it's better to talk to a Van Halen author than it is to try to figure out what's going on in Delmarva. And the silence of the Orioles, which we'll continue, and at some point we'll get to that, has been sort of an interesting thing unto itself. I mean, this is an interesting offseason for the Orioles once this World Series is over in 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, however much longer it's going to go on, because then the story locally for you and me, it's going to go to the Steelers game next week and bye week for the Ravens and the Terps. But the Orioles then become in play again when they don't have anybody running the team going out to Las Vegas in 4 weeks for the owners' meetings, right? And so whoever their fans are, they're going to get a little more razzed up in a couple of weeks. And I noticed that over the Victor Mesa thing here over the weekend, that they might not be all that fascinated whether the Red Sox win or Manny Machado loses or whatever's going to happen here. But at some point, they got to go sell tickets, and we're going to play baseball here again in 5 months. And I don't know what the hell's going on with this pigsty, to be honest with you.
Well, the silence is deafening right now. There's no question about that. I mean, you mentioned the Mesas and Sandy Gaston, who ended up signing with Tampa Bay. And look, talking to various people, I don't think the Orioles just let the next Bryce Harper slide through their fingers or the next Justin Verlander or Max Scherzer slide through their fingers. But the perception of it, on top of you're now 3 weeks removed from dismissing Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter, and there's still been no announcement. There's still been radio silence from the warehouse. I mean, even people within the organization don't know what's going on. And you're just kind of waiting. And look, I mean, as it relates to free agency starting 5 days after the World Series and the winter meetings, this offseason is going to be very inconsequential in terms of what they do with their 25-man roster for 2019. They're going to be bad. We know that. It's going to be a matter of, do they figure out a way to avoid losing 100 games? Do they come anywhere close to losing 115 games again?
Well, do these pitchers that they have contracts on, at what point will they have value to someone else that you can get rid of the money? Because, at the end of the day, they'd love to shed more of the money, and maybe that means they are being sold, and we can only pray. I free the birds, ladies and gentlemen, free the birds. But
as long as they don't sell to someone that wants to move the team.
But dude, the shedding of the Gausman thing's outlandish, literally.
Sure.
Right?
Well, and I said it the day that he was traded. I mean, when you acquire the international signing bonus slots that they did in that deal, you damn sure better get Victor Mesa, and you better hope that in the long haul he turns into something, which was never a guarantee. I mean, I still haven't seen a single serious talent evaluator make it sound like he's going to be Ken Griffey Jr. or even a Kenny Lofton, let's say. I think most people seem to think he'll be a solid starting caliber major league outfielder at his reasonable ceiling, maybe not his extreme ceiling. But
it's
anyway,
incredible, though. The pitcher's more incredible to me, a 16-year-old kid. I mean,
sure.
These stories out of Cuba are crazy. Yeah.
But it comes back to this, and this is why I was not in the camp that was in favor, that was strongly advocating trading Jonathan Scope and Kevin Gausman, because I feel that whoever was going to come in, whether it was going to be Dan Duquette re-signing and staying on as general manager, as we thought for a minute might happen, or if it was someone brand new coming in, which will be the case, I thought Scope and Gausman specifically, and Scope to a little lesser degree, but since he will hit free agency at the end of next year, and who knows, maybe the Brewers non-tender him after what happened with him in Milwaukee. But with him and Gausman, I thought those were two really attractive-looking trade chips for someone to come in and immediately put their fingerprints on this organization. Not to say that those trades would turn them around overnight or anything crazy like that, but I thought that there was an opportunity there. And I know someone's listening right now and saying, well, Kevin Gausman is overrated and a bust and all this. Well, he's a solid middle-of-the-rotation starting pitcher with 2 years of club control left. That had way more value than they ended up getting. But instead, Dan Duquette and whoever was consulted in that specific trade thought it was wiser to shed Darren O'Day's salary. And they got some international signing bonus.
Oh, I mean, there's no doubt. Back in July, when I was writing those Dear Oriole letters on the front end of the All-Star game, where the season was already gone and we didn't know what was going to become of all of this, dude, it has been a fiasco of which it feels like Peter is still mismanaging the thing because there's nobody out in front of it managing it at all, and it looked like Duquette, and as I said and as I wrote, propping him up like Weekend at Bernie's, which is exactly what they did. They paraded him around in the boat. They made him look like he was in charge. And now 3 months later, no Mesa, no Gaston, none of the Mesas, not even Jose Mesa, who probably, I don't know, is he out of jail yet? I'm not sure. But 4 months later, it's still a pigsty because of the people running it and the mismanagement of it. And that continues. And there's no flicker of hope that anything's going on, and now they don't even have Duquette or Buck to blame stuff on. And Brady Anderson is like a vapor at this point, right? And the Angelos boys are like vapor. So there's not even anything to sort of pin it on. It's insane. It really is. I mean, and somebody is waking up in a suit over there and going to work and trying to give answers to people in the warehouse, out of the warehouse, whoever their sponsors are, all the minor league people in the baseball side. I don't know what to say, dude. I mean, it might be worse than it's been because no one's running the cookie store at this point.
Well, but they're going to make a hire, and that hire needs to be right. It needs to be a good hire. But
then you ask who's making the hire. Then I always make that,
Well, John and Lou Angelos are making the hire, presumably. I mean, someone's got to be making the hire because it sure doesn't sound like Peter is involved at this point. So I'll say from that standpoint, if they do hire a good person that's willing to come here and they let them do their job, there is hope. And I do think there's something to be said that, I don't know if sleeping giant is the right term, but I think it can be successful here if done correctly. And the problem is it very rarely has been done correctly. And save for a 5-year period with Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter and a crop of players that Andy McPhail had a big part in bringing in, it hasn't been successful. So I hear you loud and clear. As far as how quiet this process has been, I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, it leads you to wonder who exactly have they talked to. And I know they've talked to people, and John Angelos talked to Ned Colletti starting back in the summer. It's not as though they haven't talked to people, but when there haven't been leaks here or in another city where presumably someone is getting permission to come interview, the number 3 guy for the Astros, the number 2 guy for, I don't know, the Milwaukee Brewers, just whichever names you want to throw out there as far as possibilities, that it hasn't leaked anywhere else, that individual is talking to the Orioles. I mean, there are leaks everywhere when that kind of stuff happens, so it makes you wonder, have they only talked to people that aren't currently working for another team? And it's bizarre in that way. But that said, if they hire a good person for the job and let that person do the job, and I know it's a big if, but kind of all they have at this point. I mean, John and Lou Angelos can see how their father did things for a long time and see that it didn't work, or they can try to learn from that and try to hire a good person and let that person do their job. And if that's the case, then this thing has a shot to work at some point. If that doesn't happen, well, it's going to be more of the same. And who knows what the future of this ball club is going to be 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But in the meantime, radio silence when the one individual that you had speak at the trade deadline, and Duquette got in front of the media, talked about the international market. Well, they struck out on their first few targets with that. But as we said, that's going to take time. It's not just about money in the international market. You need infrastructure. You need scouts. You need facilities. You need to build relationships. So many of those signings of 16, 17, 18-year-olds in the Dominican or wherever, those were cultivated. Those were established in a way that's not terribly different from college recruiting.
You have to be there.
Short of Nick Saban showing up If you want to recruit someone to come play for you,
you don't do that via text message.
Yeah.
That's human interaction at that level in a different culture, completely different culture, where no one grows up wanting an Orioles jersey.
Well, and it's because you have made a conscientious decision not to play ball there for years upon years. So I'm not shocked that they missed out on these 3 Cuban prospects. And I want to be very clear. In and of itself, I don't think any of those 3 individuals are Manny Machado or, Clayton Kershaw, like that kind of special talent. But the perception of it just, the beat goes on in that regard. It's a terrible perception. But I'll go back to the point I was trying to make about Dan Duquette. They had Duquette say all these things that sounded really good at the trade deadline, and then you throw him off the ship, which is fine, but no one.
By the way, he sounded shocked. He sounded like they were leading him to believe that he was going to be running the thing the next 3 years. He's such a weird dude anyway. I mean, I only know him through Nick Cafardo at the Boston Globe because it's pretty clear he talks to him, and it sounds like his word through the industry is they lied to me, right?
Yeah, but I've also heard from talking to a couple people that there might have been some politicking going on there, too.
Well, I mean, he told everybody in Baltimore he wanted the hell out of here for 3 years, so yes.
Right, well, but also there could have been, maybe there were discussions about him continuing, and maybe Dan presented those being more definite than they were. Who knows? Who knows? But
they propped him up like Weekend at Bernie's, like he really was running it. The perception was to the fans. The message to the fans was he was going to be running it.
That's the thing. The perception of everything he said, and from what I understand, it's not as though Dan Duquette just went rogue and said those things. John and Lou Angelos and the organization do want to start having a presence in the international market, and they do want to revamp their analytics department and do those types of things, which is good because they need to do those things. But the point is, they had Dan Duquette express that message at the trade deadline, and then he's gone. We don't even know from a public figure confirming this kind of standpoint. No one else in the organization has spoken to fans to say that that's still the plan, even though we've moved on from Dan Duquette. So, I mean, it's such a rudderless ship, no captain, no vision, nothing has been laid out there short of a 250-word statement that was unveiled 3 weeks ago, and you still haven't hired the head of baseball ops. In turn, whether that means you hire a GM to work under that person, and then who's going to be your manager. I mean, it's not as though those things need to be set in place right now, immediately, but boy, you need to start making decisions. And, you also have a ton of people in this organization, from major league coaches on down to minor league staff and people within the front office and baseball ops and go down the list. Their contracts run out at the end of the month, so it's unfair to those individuals more so than even your fan base in letting this drag out and not communicating and just leaving people to wonder what the hell's going on. You've made these changes. It's fine if you wanted to fire Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter, but
now who are you going to hire?
Probably made that decision that you were going to do that back in, say, June or July, right? I mean, it's not as though this was a team that just collapsed over the final 3 weeks. This thing was a disaster from early April on.
If the guy they wanted to hire wasn't employed, if they wanted to hire Mike Bordick, they could have thrown him down into the dugout the weekend of the All-Star break, dealt off everybody, and just said, you know what, we're gonna buy some confidence so we don't have to worry about that in the off season. You would think that, given all of that's gone on and how long this went on, that if you were throwing Buck and Dan out, you'd have a really good idea of who you want to bring in, and it doesn't feel like there's any of that. And there's such arrogance amongst these kids. I mean, just the way we've all been treated is very arrogant, I think. But there's an arrogance about them that I think they smell themselves and think, well, we're one of 30 jobs. Someone will want this job. Someone didn't want this job the last time, And it's way worse than what Buck and Dan found here in the aftermath of Andy McPhail. I mean, there was some validity to the fact that there was some talent here, and that was borne out in the results. There's no one in the sport that looks at this as anything other than a black hole right now. So them finding credible people to interview, and like any other job, we're just going to go out and hire the best people, and people are going to come to us. That has not been the case. That certainly does not appear to be the case. And they've now thrown out credible guys without any thought that there might be someone as credible in line who wants to take the gig at any price.
Well, we don't know that. We'll see. And I will say this. I think it's attractive from the standpoint of an individual. And Ben Cherington, it was leaked out there a couple weeks ago that he specifically wanted a job that was basically scorched earth and you were building from the bottom up. There's that appeal if, and this is the million-dollar question, if that person is truly given carte blanche to do what they need to do.
In other words, if you don't have a maniac for an owner, period.
Right,
period.
Which, we don't know if John and Lou Angelos are maniac owners. Time will tell on that. So
I give them low marks so far. That's all I'm saying. I give them low marks for how the last – because I went into this. Go back and read my Dear Orioles letter to them. It's 3 months old now. We're 90 days, 100 days into this. They propped up John Vitelin to the Baltimore Business Journal, and he's on a milk carton somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's
– I hear you. I agree. I'm not saying they have handled things well.
They get an F, for fail or something else. But right now it's an F
I don't
so
know.
far.
What
are you giving them?
They get an F, I guess, just because the team was so terrible this year. But to this point, they haven't. If you talk about the decisions to let go of Buck and Dan, I think most people were fine with that. So I'm not going to give that part of it an F.
I think Buck and Dan let go of Buck and Dan.
Well, I think it was time. We don't need to they're gone.
Okay,
we don't need to rehash
fair enough.
that. But
I don't know that they were thrown out as much as they said enough. Literally.
Well, it's just I think it was time. But at some point in time here, you need to, 1, make your hire, 2, get in front of people and express your vision. And if they hire a head of baseball ops and that person's going to be vice president, whatever title they give the person, and that person's going to speak and they're truly in charge, then fine. I think we've always talked about you don't want owners meddling. Well, you also don't want or you want owners that want to win, but you also don't want Jerry Jones who holds a press conference every single week. I'm fine with an owner that wants to stay in the background, but ultimately you need to make decisions and you need to hire good people and then let them do their job. And until we see who that person is, and until we see this play out, there's all the reasons in the world to be skeptical.
Yeah, well, competence comes before confidence.
But I do think, and Theo Epstein talked about this at the time, even though the Cubs, certainly you looked at their financial flexibility, but that team was an absolute disaster when he got there. Cherington's talked about this. There are certain young executive types that are smart and probably have some arrogance and some ego, that they look at a situation like the Orioles, if they're truly given the opportunity to run it, that's actually there's some appeal to the idea that you can have this piece of clay, there's just this big ball of clay that you can make something into.
Well, the appeal of the Orioles is Peter isn't running it. It won't be Peter. It'll be someone else. Now, whether they're better, worse, smarter, dumber, I don't know. I don't know anything about these kids other than I'm judging them beginning now. And so far, I'm not impressed. I'm not.
And believe me, I don't disagree with you in that sense. But that's if the sell job to get someone to take this job, that's just it right there. And if that's truly what it's going to be, then I don't think it's the worst job in the world. I don't think it's the best job by any stretch, and it's sure going to be a hell of a lot of work to get this thing back on track. But if you're truly someone that covets being the head of a baseball operations department and making all the decisions and building a presence in the international market and building a farm system and an infrastructure and beefing up an analytics department that was there but not really moving the meter like it should have been compared to other teams in this division, let alone the rest of baseball, then I think that this looks like a more appealing job than you might think. But if it's going to be much of the same. It's not Peter Angelos, but it's going to be the Angelos boys, and Brady Anderson's still going to be highly influential, and you're going to have other people that are held over in this organization that are going to remain from previous regimes, then no, I don't think it looks remotely appealing. And to your point, the reason that Dan Duquette ended up being their executive vice president of baseball operations was because about 5 or 6 other guys that they wanted to hire, which at that point were cutting-edge types of individuals. So, I think they had the right thoughts in mind as far as who they wanted to hire, but it's really, really difficult to change perception. And that's one thing that I will empathize ever so slightly with the Angelos Suns, that they have a ton of perceptions, a ton of history to come back from here in terms of making good hires and getting people to come in and getting people to trust you. And that's going to take time, and that's something that they aren't, it's not their fault per se, but they have to live with it, and they're going to have to pay for some of those sins. And what happened with the Mesas and Sandy Gaston is a perfect example of that. The Orioles deliberately ignored the international market for years and years and years, and just because you acquire some signing bonus slots and swoop in and make an offer doesn't mean that you're going to get people to bite. That's a process, and this entire thing, turning this entire thing around and making it viable, is going to be a heck of a process. And you just pray, if you're an Orioles fan, that they hire a good person and they let that person do their job and get out of the way and come up for air in a few years, and you hope things are heading in the right direction.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. I'm Nasty at WNST.net. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube, WNST TV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.